Hi, my name is Madison2020, and my project is on Orange Shirt Day. First off, I would like to acknowledge and thank Phyllis Webstad for sharing her story about her residential school experience. I would also like to thank the elders and UVic students for sharing their culture. I also want to thank other Indigenous people I mentioned for sharing their stories. I chose this event because I had heard about Orange Shirt Day previously, but I did not know anything about it. Hearing the overview of Phyllis's story in class intrigued me, so I decided to learn more about the effects of residential schools on Indigenous wellness. I also wanted to learn about how Orange Shirt Day is helping change the stigma around talking about Canada's past. In my research before the event, I decided to learn about Orange Shirt Day itself in residential schools. To start, I watched videos on the residential schools, as well as looked at the information in the course material about intergenerational trauma. The documentary Colonization Road also opened my eyes to how the forced movement in combination with the residential schools were all plans by the Canadian government to assimilate the Indigenous people into Euro-Canadian culture. I also found some articles detailing what Orange Shirt Day is and its message. The event I attended was the UVic Orange Shirt Day event, which included a traditional blessing and welcome to the land, as well as an Indigenous song sung by one of the elders. There was a cultural performance by 2 UVic students, something like this one. Next was an interview with Lisa Canoras, a grandchild of a residential school survivor, explaining the intergenerational trauma caused by the residential schools. She also explained what Orange Shirt Day means to her and her culture. Her grandma even had her own story about how her brand new moccasins were taken away from her when she went to residential school. The main event of the program was the interview between Chancellor Sheila Rogers and Phyllis Webstad. Phyllis explained her story as well as her experiences with Orange Shirt Day. She mentioned how it came to be, as well as some of the other things she had heard about Orange Shirt Day from others. My role in the event was as a respectful listener, going into it with an open mind and heart. I may have my own opinion about Orange Shirt Day that may be different from others watching the event, but together we all had to be willing to hear the story of a residential school survivor with an open mind. During Phyllis's interview, she mentioned how she was excited to go to school and had no idea what was to come. From my research of other residential school survivor stories, I found that this was a common feeling for most Indigenous children heading to the residential schools for the first time. I also found that there were many instances of brand new clothing being taken away. If parents didn't want to send their children, they would be imprisoned. Grace Greyeyes, a residential school survivor and elder from Penticton Indian Band, said her parents received a letter from the Canadian government stating that if they did not send their children to residential school, they would face jail time. Eventually, it just became the thing to do. That was the reasoning behind Phyllis's own time at the mission. Once there, terrible things happened to many of the students. There are countless stories about the physical, mental, emotional, sexual, and spiritual abuse the children suffered at the school. Grace talked about how she would get her wrists strapped until they turned blue. She also remembered having to confess for sins to priests every day, having to make up things that they would forgive her for. They were not allowed to do any of their traditions and were punished if they did, and were forced to learn how to pray to a God they didn't believe in. To Indigenous people, every single day that we walk on this earth plane is special. The connectedness and relationship with our natural environment was lost. They also were not allowed to use any of their traditional languages, and with this loss of language came a loss of communication with their families. The residential schools taught Indigenous children that the storytelling of their parents, grandparents, and their elders were not true. This caused a loss of many traditions. The children were also shouted at, called racial slurs, and degraded. Some of the children were also sexually abused by their so-called protectors. The residential schools continue to affect Indigenous individuals and communities even today. Indigenous people still have worse health outcomes than non-Indigenous people, are more likely to be obese, have diabetes and other chronic conditions, and are more likely to suffer from PTSD and other mental health disorders. Indigenous people were also cut off from their culture, causing major losses of traditions and languages, as well as a poor spiritual connection to the land. Indigenous people also suffer from being silenced and their trauma and their stigma of sharing their experiences. Thankfully, Orange Shirt Day is helping change the stigma. Orange Shirt Day symbolizes many things for many people. For survivors, it symbolizes just a little bit of justice for what was done to them. One Indigenous person told Phyllis that the Orange Shirt Day pins represent understanding, and seeing people wearing it makes her comfortable to be able to tell her story. Phyllis herself said that color orange has always reminded her of how she was worth nothing, but now has become a symbol of hope for the future instead of a terrible reminder of the past for her. For others, Orange Shirt Day has become an opportunity to reflect on our past and how we can change to prevent a repeat. For me, it represents the acknowledgement of our mistakes in the past and the want to be better for future generations. This was a very difficult topic to research for me. Lots of the information sickened me, so I had to take breaks while researching. During the event, I did not have trouble with listening, but if I had, I would have left the room to take a moment to reflect and breathe. What I have learned from this event and my research is that we must listen to Indigenous people tell their stories and learn about our past, and do what we can to advance reconciliation. If we do not try, then we are more than likely to repeat our past mistakes. Thank you.